The final element of gameplay depth for Foot Joust is the Powerup System, a fundamental idea that has been planned since the game's inception. Power-ups are an old cliche video game trope, but they're a reliable one, which is why it will create that extra icing on top and variance to gameplay, complementing with the swipe combat. Everything so far built in the game leading up to now has created the foundation for implementation of this system, and now I can finally begin working on it. So if you are new here or just forgot, we have already designed all the power-ups months ago, added them as objects for the player's inventory, and added them to the shop system. They now just need to be usable in-game and added to the crates as a pickup. At first I had no idea how to implement this or even what was good practice. I needed to be able to handle and call 30 different functions, which is definitely not too many, but it's also not a small amount. I wanted to find the best way to just avoid creating a massive load of scripts all over the place. So I just decided to do it all in one script and create a method named after each power-up. So my next problem was, how do I even call these functions? Well, it turns out you can call functions through a string after what they are named. So all I had to do was create an array of strings, which automatically fills in by scanning through the power-ups in the item manager, which I've already created. The power-ups listed here already contain an ID number, a name, description, its icon, its cost, and a bunch of other useful pieces of information. It just then takes the name and puts it in an array of strings in order. Next, all I needed was an array that corresponds to the buttons that will be on screen for the player to press when activating. These will be dynamically filled in with the ID of the power-up later. For now, I can just manually key in what ID we want to work with for what button. It will also then look up the correct icon for that button and then display it. So now if I set the top button to an ID of 0, it will show the correct icon and then get the very first string in our special array and use it to call the correct method when pressed. Not all power-ups will be activated by pressing their button, some of them will be running throughout the whole run, so I added a new variable to the item manager to select if they are passive. At the start of a run, the power-up manager will look at what currently selected power-ups are passive and just call their methods straight away to get them activated. So for example, we have a power-up that will protect the corresponding piece of armor that the power-up is equipped to from projectiles. If the player is hit in the chest by this arrow, the power-up will break before the armor does. On top of that, I've also added the ability to run faster or run slower like so. So as explained before, power-ups can only be equipped to an upgraded piece of armor, which means if a piece of armor breaks down to the base level where the player is vulnerable, regardless of it being in use or still needing to be used. I also made all 3 of the player's potential projectile attacks. The first 2 are a fireball and an ice shard, where the fireball attack cools down every 30 seconds while the ice shard takes about 20 seconds. They both deal 1 HP of damage. For the fireball, I created this animation with particle effects like this for when it explodes. The ice shard didn't need to be animated, so I just added this sprite and changed the color of the particle effect. After these 2, I made the lightning strike attack, which works a lot differently. Unlike the ice and fire, there is no object that travels across until it hits something. I needed to find a way to look for targets in front of the player and strike them down in the location they stand. So the easiest way to do this is when the player presses the power-up button, it then calls a raycast to see if it can find an enemy in front of them. If it does, it will track their location and play this animation over the top of them and then kill them. There's a few more tweaks for this that I still have to do, since it doesn't work when there are projectiles in front of the player blocking the raycast. And then there's the Octojoust where it's not in a line of sight for the raycast to catch. Then there's also bosses, which have different patterns and phases for how their health works. And this is as far as I got so far. I spent a lot less time actually working on game dev recently, and there are a lot more components to this that I still have to do. So I didn't quite hit the deadline that I expected, meaning I will split this video into 2 parts and we'll finish the rest off sometime early next year. So I'll see you then.